How you doing, everybody? And welcome to another episode of the John Riley Project. It's Wednesday, June 4th. This is our 342nd episode. Can you believe it? Boy, it's nice to be back with y'all. And we got some great things we have in store for you. We're going to talk today really about two main things. On the national level, I want to talk about Trump and Trump's strategy and his goals. I mean, what do you really think Trump is up to? Because a lot of his policies make no sense, but I've got a theory on Trump, and I'm going to break that down for you. Interested in your thoughts and comments on that. The second big topic, we're going to go focus here in my hometown of Poway, California. And there's always something interesting going on here, a lot of interesting local politics. We have a recall going on with Tony Blain, one of our city council members. There's more controversy about more housing in Poway, and we're going to break all that down as well and give you kind of an update on where everything stands. So thanks for joining us. Welcome to the John Riley Project podcast. I'm starting to do these more as recorded podcasts, and hopefully soon I'll get into a nice rhythm of getting back on the schedule of doing live streams. But for now, we're recording, and I'm going to post this later tonight. So thanks for watching. Okay, let's dive right in and let's talk about President Trump. And the question here is, what is Donald Trump's real goal? Okay. And this is something that I've been thinking about lately. And like I said, I've come up with a theory on what his real goal is. And I may be late to the table on this, but this is just kind of my idea. And I want you to challenge me on this, because so many of his policies make no sense. They make no sense economically. A lot of his policies are contradictions with other policies, but yet he remains in power. And yet you wonder, what does he really care about? I mean, what does he really care about? So let's go through this. I mean, the first thing is, we're always seeing these bombastic ideas. Like, here's the picture of Trump as the new pope that he put out on his, I don't know if that was Truth Social or Instagram, but we've seen all of the other bombastic ideas. We're going to deport all the illegal aliens. We're going to build a big, beautiful wall. We've got a big, beautiful bill. We're going to, what else did he say? We're going to rename it the Gulf of Mexico. We're going to rename it the Gulf of California. They're eating dogs and cats. All of this nonsense. And this is like obviously unlike any other president we've ever seen. But it makes you wonder, does he really, really personally, does he care about a lot of these things? You could even roll back the clock into the 1980s, and there's been really two big things he's been talking about for like roughly 40 years. And one of them is illegal immigration, and the other are, trade imbalances, trade tariffs, trade wars. So it's essentially illegal immigration and trade. But there's all this other stuff that he talks about that are just crazy. But do you think he really cares about illegal immigration? Think it through here, okay? Are his jobs, his family's jobs threatened by illegal immigrants? No. Is there crime in where he lives? No. And granted, illegal immigrants commit far less crime on a per capita basis than American citizens do. And he hires illegal immigrants to work in his hotels and his casinos. He's married immigrant wives, 3 of them. One of which, Melania, I think, was an illegal immigrant for a period of time. So he doesn't care about illegal immigrants, but that was the first thing he talked about when he announced his president's campaign in 2015. Remember when he was at Trump Tower and he came down the escalator and, they're all a bunch of criminals and murderers and rapists and, all these Mexicans, and we're going to build a big, beautiful wall to keep them out. Well, maybe some of them are good. And it was shocking when he made that announcement. And you're thinking, does he really believe this? And I don't think he does. I don't think it really matters to him. If illegal immigrants are getting free government services, which they do in some cases, like, education, if you're an illegal immigrant family and you have an illegal immigrant child, they can still get education at government schools, at public schools. I know that illegal immigrants, if they roll into a emergency room, they can get healthcare, and I think that's partly paid or mostly or all paid by taxpayer dollars. But generally speaking, illegal immigrants aren't, in big numbers collecting Social Security or on Medicare or on food stamps. I mean, you got to be a citizen to qualify for all that. So does Trump really care about that? And really, in the whole scheme of things, it's a tiny, tiny fraction of the overall amount of money that government spends on the federal, state, and local levels on illegal immigrants, especially when the police state isn't going crazy running around deporting everybody. But what all of this is these are all just manipulation of the media and manipulation of voters, particularly MAGA voters. And I think that this is the strategy here. He throws these things out there constantly to rally his base, to poke the Democrats, and ultimately to remain in power. So it's like he is running a circus here, and he's keeping everybody off balance when these are the issues he doesn't really care about. And so it makes me think of a magician, right? The thing with a magician, they always say is, watch what the other hand is doing, right? Because he gets the audience to focus on one thing, but meanwhile, he's doing something different. And so what is that thing that's different? And here's my conclusion, and I'm going to break down some examples of this, is that as long as he's president of the United States, and he's going to go out there making deals, he's a deal-making president, which, he may or may not be able to pull all these off. I think a lot of that's in doubt. But ultimately, he wants to set up a platform, a power base, so that his children can go out doing deals around the world. And so the wealth of the Trump empire, the wealth of the Trump family grows and grows and grows. And he's using his power as president to make that happen. Because if he wasn't president, his kids wouldn't nearly have the kind of leverage that they have now in these kinds of negotiations. So let's kind of break this down into a couple of different examples. Okay, this line, by the way, Taco, have you heard this? Trump always chickens out. And, tariffs are on, tariffs are off. We're going to raise the tariffs up to 150%. Oh, no, we're going to bring it down to 85%. Oh, wait, we're going to put a pause on tariffs for a week or two, until we can negotiate something here. Oh, I've got people lined up. 150 nations are lined up, ready to do trade deals with us. A lot of that is just grandstanding. He's like a carnival barker doing this. What he's doing is trying to keep the volatility of the marketplace, the volatility of the media narrative kind of cooking all the time. But let's break this down here real clear. I've mentioned this before in my previous episodes. Trade deficits don't matter. Okay. And that is key to understand. Now, budget deficits matter. Trade deficits don't matter. Budget deficits, like this big, beautiful bill that's going to increase the national debt by $5 trillion. That's a problem. You're going to have huge deficit spending, $2-3 trillion a year in deficit spending. You're going to get $5 trillion of an increase in the debt. That's a problem. That takes money away from the private sector where it can be used a lot more productively. That's what endangers our bonds. And, our bonds are being downgraded by analysts because they're concerned that America isn't going to be good to back up the loans and the money that's out there in treasury bonds. So and then, by the way, if the national debt keeps going up and up, and right now it's $36 trillion. Remember, like Reagan, when he took office in 1980, the national debt was about $1 trillion. Okay. And then George H.W. Bush raised it about $1.5 trillion. Clinton, despite balancing the budget for 4 years and despite running a surplus for 4 years, he still raised the national debt about $1.6 trillion. Then Bush rolls in, he increased the national debt by $5.5 trillion. Then Obama rolls in, it was like $8 or $9 trillion under Obama's watch. Okay, then Trump #1, and Trump 45 came in and he jacked up the debt about $8 trillion. And then Biden rolls in and he's jacked up the he's jacked up the deficit by about another 8 trillion. And by the way, we're still in Joe Biden's final fiscal year. And now Trump is rolling out this big, beautiful bill that's going to jack up the national debt, probably 5 trillion in just 2 years. So the national debt matters, but a trade deficit doesn't matter. The national deficit matters. The trade deficit does not matter. I mean, what is a trade deficit? Well, the way it's framed at the political level and in the media, it's basically like you look at America and Canada as an example, and which nation is buying more stuff from the other nation. You know, it's just an aggregation of all the transactions that are done by private individuals and private companies. And then at the end, they add it all up and they find out that one company spent more than the other, one country spent more than the other country. But let's be clear here. Nations do not trade with one another. People trade, corporations trade, trades at the individual level. Each transaction is balanced. Each transaction is fair trade. Why? Because in each transaction, the buyer and the seller have both mutually agreed to voluntarily make a swap, to make a trade. I'll give you money, you give me stuff in return. And so if every transaction is fair and balanced, if you add them all up, they're all fair and balanced. And if it turns out that one country, when you add it up, just kind of look at the bottom of the spreadsheet, this is just an aggregation. If one country happens to buy more from the other country than vice versa, so what? I mean, you have a trade deficit with your grocery store. You give them a lot of money every week, every month, and in return, you get produce, vegetables, protein. You get, all kinds of goods and products in grocery stores. We can make the list. You get all that in return. Meanwhile, your grocery store, how much do they buy from you? Whatever business you're in, whatever your career is, how much does your local grocery store buy from you? Probably none at all. Does that matter? No, of course it doesn't matter. Trade deficits don't matter. So when Trump is pushing this rhetoric of Canada is ripping us off and China is ripping us off, we're subsidizing these other countries because of the trade deficit. We're not subsidizing these other countries. We're trading with them. Just like you're not subsidizing your grocery store. You're trading with them. A subsidy would be if I just wrote a check and handed it off to my grocery store when they were in trouble financially and says, here, this will help you out a little bit. That would be a subsidy. But if I'm getting goods in return, that's trade, and trade is not a ripoff. I mean, with rare exception when there's fraud or things that are considered, but those are the exceptions to the rule. So why is Trump doing this? Do you think he cares? Not really. He doesn't care about this. If he doesn't care that what you're buying is getting more expensive, he doesn't really even care that Japan isn't buying enough Cadillacs to, big ass Cadillacs to drive through, crowded Tokyo. He doesn't care about that. What he does know, though, is that it's a great tool to create a scapegoat. In this case, the nation. China, Canada, Mexico, they're ripping us off. He creates a scapegoat. And you'll see leaders in empires and in nations throughout human history will always create a scapegoat, or often create a scapegoat, because that gets the base all fired up. And then suddenly there's a fight about the virtue or the evilness of that particular scapegoat. But these are fake scapegoats, at least on the basis of what he's claiming. Trade deficit, there's no problem there. Now, you can make an argument with China as far as IP, intellectual property theft. You can make an argument that China is a concern from a geopolitical rivalry perspective. I mean, there's a lot of criticism, rightfully, of China. But China is not ripping us off, and China should not be made a scapegoat for the fact that we trade with them. I mean, frankly, it's a great thing. I mean, think about how many people have risen out of poverty in Asia over the last 30 years. Over 1 billion people have risen out of abject poverty because of this dramatic change in the way, trade, international trade is being done. The fact that we're trading more with them, we're getting more stuff, which makes our lives better. And meanwhile, those people in those nations, corporations in those nations, in China, in Vietnam, in India, elsewhere, their wealth is rising. And now they can invest and buy more in America. See, trade is win-win. But Trump's mentality is always to frame everything as win-lose. That's how he thinks. I win, you lose. Or I'm losing, you're winning, and that's a problem. I need to win and you can lose. Where trade is win-win. Now, while we're having this argument, while the media is talking about trade deficits, while Trump is out there scapegoating China, telling everybody they're ripping us off, meanwhile, Eric Trump and Don Jr. are out there cooking up deals, billion-dollar real estate deals. I mean, they were recently at a Bitcoin conference, and Trump's got his own meme coin that he's trying to cook up. So all of these things that his children are doing, and in other cases, it's Jared Kushner. He was doing a lot of those deals in the first term, Ivanka Trump's husband. They're the ones that are out there that are enriching the family using the Trump name and only have access to these kinds of deals because they're a Trump, because Trump is, the leader of the biggest nation, most powerful nation on the planet. So again, it's like a magician. We're all arguing about the Gulf of America or trade. They're ripping us off on trade or illegal immigration. But really, watch the other hand and watch what his family is doing. Okay, here's another great example of this. And let's talk about the Trump's art of the steal. And I mean steal like S-T-E-E-L, like the steel industry is what I'm talking about here. And there's a great picture on my screen, if you're watching, of Trump on stage with a big sign that says American Jobs, American Steel. He's got all the steel workers behind him wearing their hard hats and their vests. And Trump's up there dancing with them. And it makes for a great photo op. But really, what's going on here? Now, first of all, Trump is raising tariffs on steel from 25% to 50%. And that's crazy. Okay. Now, by the way, meanwhile, steel tariffs used to be dramatically lower, but Biden raised them to 25%. Targeted steel tariffs on Canada and Mexico, and I think China too, 25%. Biden did that. Now Trump's taking it from 25 to 50%. Now, never mind the fact that Democrats will defend Biden tariffs, but be angry with Trump tariffs, which I think is hypocrisy. But this, again, is nonsense, okay? And this is really just a political strategy. I mean, not only did he say we're going to jack up the tariffs, supposedly meaning that now competitive steel from overseas is going to be a lot more expensive, and therefore people think they're going to be buying a lot more American steel, which protects the jobs of the steel workers. But Trump is also promising them a $5,000 bonus and no layoffs, which, by the way, I don't know how a president of the United States can make such promises. But never mind the fact that, do you think he really cares about steel workers? Really? Do you think he really cares about the steel industry? Well, maybe to a certain degree as a real estate guy building these, skyscrapers, they use steel. But really, what is Trump really trying to do here? Now, keep in mind also, just as an aside, when steel is tariffed, the last time that happened, when Biden raised the tariffs on steel to 25%, you would think that American steel domestic manufacturers would be overjoyed, thinking, oh, my competitors are going to be a lot more expensive. Now I'll be less expensive and I'll be able to get a lot more business. But domestic steel manufacturers raise their price. because their competitors raise their price. So already, no matter if you're buying the steel from American steel companies or from international providers, we're paying more. And you might think, oh, it's just steel. I mean, I don't need steel. I mean, if I was building a skyscraper like a Trump Tower, I might need steel. But think of it this way: the steel that is imported is used for, as components, as parts for all kinds of products that are made here in America. So now the input of the cost of manufactured goods is going up. The prices are going up. And who's paying that? You and me. So we're the ones getting screwed here. But people still defend it. They're like, well, we need steel manufacturing in America. This is a national security issue. And again, this is the shiny object that's meant to distract us. First of all, roughly speaking, about 3/4 of the steel in the United States is coming from U.S. manufacturers. 25% is coming from overseas. All right, so already America is dominant in the steel industry. But on top of that, you're going to when tariffs are raised on imported steel, you might say, well, we're protecting the jobs of those American steel workers. Well, you are to a degree, but really not very many workers are really involved here, because besides the fact that the steel companies are going to raise their price here in America, which is going to give them more money to be able to hold on to more jobs. But at the same time, the steel industry is not like a Henry Ford assembly line, or like Lucille Ball on an assembly line, or Laverne and Shirley at the bottlery on an assembly line, where it's so human oriented. The steel manufacturing business is dramatically automated. And so the amount of jobs relative to the amount of steel produced is really kind of small. But the steel that is being used in products, whether they're for air conditioners or auto parts or what have you, that's going to go up, making U.S. companies less competitive. And as a result, we're going to see way more job loss in other ancillary industries because of steel tariffs than we would see steel worker layoffs without doing the tariffs. So again, it's from an economic perspective, it makes no sense. And that's what just drives me bananas with all this, is why in the hell is this going on? And then you see different factions in America supporting it, or upset about it, or defending tariffs when Democrats do it, but upset with tariffs when politicians do it. And I know that they're economic nonsense. Nearly any reputable economist in America knows that tariffs are nonsense. We learned our lesson with Smoot-Hawley in the early 30s, which led to the Great Depression when trade radically was reduced. So why is Trump doing this? It's politics. I mean, this is not an economic strategy. This is a political strategy. He wants to build strong loyalty with this base of workers. Okay, first you're getting the blue collar workers, which traditionally used to be Democrat. Now they're coming to Republican. You're getting blue collar workers in Pennsylvania, right? What's special about Pennsylvania? It's a swing state. Okay, so, and then a lot of the other, steel manufacturing, you kind of associate that with a lot of the Midwest, a lot of that Rust Belt, which is where, Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania are all swing states. So this is just an attempt to lock in an electoral college strategy for him and future Republicans or future MAGAs, or maybe even future Trumps that get into the White House. So while he's doing all that, keep your eye on what his family is doing, because this makes no sense. This just creates, MAGA loves it. MAGA thinks you're doing the right thing for America. Finally, America first. People that are smart enough to see through this know that it's nonsense. And then crazy partisan people think the tariffs are bad when Team Red does it, but they're good when Team Blue does it, which further muddies the waters on all of this. So keep your eye on all of this. I mean, ultimately, watch what the deals are that his kids are making, because Eric Trump was recently, I think, out in one of the Middle Eastern nations along the Persian Gulf. Was it Qatar or Qatar? Was it UAE? It was one of those. And they're working on, $1 billion Trump towers like in Vietnam and China and everywhere. I mean, so that's the strategy for Trump, in my opinion. And again, I challenge you if you prove me wrong here. But because I know that when you look at this using reason, when you look at this using logic, using the economics education that we've all been taught, and witnessing the reality in the real world, like Smoot-Hawley tariffs and how they've been so terrible for America, we know that this is a stupid economic policy. Yet he pursues it. And you might say, well, because Trump's an idiot. Okay, well, Trump definitely at times can be an idiot, but don't underestimate this guy. I mean, he went to the Wharton School of Business. I mean, so which is a Ivy League school, got his MBA there. But even saying that, I mean, the guy's made a lot of money, and he does it in very shrewd, calculated, and in fact, in a lot of ways, as a con man. And I got to say this, and I should have kicked off the podcast with this. This is the one big thing for me that has made everything sort of make sense, is that once I fully accepted Trump as a con man, then everything sort of in its own weird way made sense. You realize that he was trying to fool people, mislead people, divert people, deflect from people, that he wasn't straightforward, and he really has no political philosophy. His stuff is all over the place. His ideas violate not only traditional Republican political positions, but frankly, violate common sense, violate history that we've learned previously of things that work and don't work. But yet he pushes this. And I think it's because he's a con man, and he doesn't care about he doesn't care about the result of all this other than the fact that it keeps him in power. And by staying in power, he then has the opportunity to enhance the wealth of the Trump family, the Trump empire, and of, his movement by remaining in power. So his minions, particularly his children, can do all these deals. Now, here's another one. We're going to replace the income tax with tariffs. You may have heard this one. And a lot of people are saying, yeah, this is a great idea. Before 1913, when they enacted the income tax, that's how America used to fund itself. We used to be all tariffs, no income tax. And yeah, that's true. But, back in the 1800s, the government represented about, 3 or 4% of GDP. Now it's like 40 or 50% when you add up federal, state, and local. I mean, the government is massive, just enormously bigger proportionately now than it was then. So how in the hell are you going to fund it all with the tariffs that were being generated then, even with the bigger trade here? It doesn't make sense. So now the latest line is that, what we're going to do is once we get this, big, beautiful bill and the trade war really cooking, and we got tariffs are coming in, we're generating all this money on tariffs. Like here's another con man thing. He says the tariffs are coming from other countries. Other countries are paying the tariff. And as a matter of fact, we created an external revenue service, to be a partner agency with the Internal Revenue Service to collect all this money that's coming from foreign nations. But foreign nations don't pay for the tariff. American companies do. The importer at the port of call pays the tariff and then passes that along to their resellers and distributors and retailers, and ultimately to us as consumers. We're the ones paying the tariff. The tariff income is coming from Americans. We're the ones getting screwed here. But again, it's con man. It's just a blatant, bold lie is what it is. So, excuse me. So now what he's saying is, okay, well, what we're going to do is everybody that makes less than $150,000, we're going to end income tax for them entirely, because we're going to be able to replace it with the revenue that comes in from tariffs. And if you're not really well educated, if you're kind of a MAGA loyalist, You might say, well, that kind of makes sense. I like that idea. And after all, in America, we only funded our federal government with tariffs anyways. So yeah, let's cut taxes on the people under 150,000. We need our money, but which they're right on that point because the taxes are kind of ripping the people off. But at the same time, there's no way. I mean, the math doesn't add up. So let's run through this. So I did a little research, and when you talk about the top 1% and the top 10% in America, there are different ways to measure it. Is it measured based on wealth? Is it measured based on income? How do you stack rank the top 10%, the top 20%, and what economic variables or criteria do you use to set that? Well, in my opinion, it should be based on wealth, because I think that's what they're pretty much talking about. But from an income perspective, the top you go from the bottom 90% into the top 10% when you cross the threshold of about $160,000 a year in income. Okay. And that kind of sort of sounds about right. Now, obviously, the top 1% are making far, 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 far more than that in income. But to get into the top 10%, you got to be earning about 160 grand, which in California is not a lot of money. It's a lot, but it's not a lot. So if you figure that if we know, by the way, that the top 10% pay 40% of all taxes. Do I have that right? No, excuse me. I don't have that right. The top 1% pay about 40% of taxes. The top 10% pay about 70% of the taxes. No, my math is all goofed up. I had this prepared, but I think I made a false assumption. I'm going to sketch this out again, and I'll come back to you with this. I'm not confident that even you could replace the federal income tax for people under 150,000 with a tariff. Because keep in mind this, is that the whole point of tariffs is to reduce imported goods. So if your tariff strategy is really working, you're going to have less tariffs coming in, and therefore less and less revenue from tariffs coming in. So a lot of this doesn't make sense. So again, electoral strategy here, basically offering these giveaways. We're going to cut taxes making less than 150. We're going to give no taxes on tips, no taxes on Social Security, hitting every little special interest group to try to solidify voting, to solidify an electoral college strategy, even though this doesn't make sense. Not at all. I mean, because the Trump tariffs are only going to generate, depending on whichever, version you've seen, between $200 and $500 billion a year. Okay. You can't make that up by eliminating the income tax on the people that make less than 150,000. It's just the numbers don't work. Here's another one. The Trump brain drain. Again, more manipulation of the voters. Trump is driving away international college students. He's trying to ban them from going to Harvard. He's been attacking the students at Columbia that have been protesting against the Israeli, Palestinian conflict. They're essentially anti-Israel, pro-Gaza. He's attacking them, in a lot of cases, attacking them for their free speech rights. But then instead of what he does is he finds a way to deport them because they're here as international students. But international students, by the way, they have free speech rights. We all have free speech rights. We all have inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We're all created equal. Under that basis, we all have those rights. And by the way, the First Amendment with free speech starts off with Congress shall make no law. So the First Amendment doesn't say citizens have free speech, but non-citizens don't, or citizens have free speech, but corporations don't. It doesn't say any of that. It just says that Congress cannot make a law to abridge free speech. And that's what he's doing here, is he's trying to use free speech as a mechanism to get rid of international students. And of course, MAGA loves this because MAGA has always had a grudge against all the elites in the Ivy League universities, because a lot of them have turned out to be a lot of the leaders in American politics and in American businesses. And so there's been this sort of class rivalry going on. But Trump is just feeding that. Now, does it make sense to 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 block international students from coming to America? No, no, it doesn't at all. I mean, in my opinion, an international student that comes to America that gets a degree, particularly a STEM degree, science, technology, engineering, math, those people should have a green card for legal residency and the legal right to work in America and have it stapled to their diploma upon graduation. We should be retaining these international, students that have proven that they have advanced degrees and they can go out and be very helpful in the American economy, which makes America greater. We're a nation of immigrants. People say, well, we need to do immigration based on merit. Well, being a college student that has achieved a degree in a STEM field, is that not merit? We should be retaining these people in the United States, not shipping them out back to their foreign country, back to their home country, and in many cases, empowering many of our rivals like China, et cetera. So it's a crazy policy. And it's a brain drain on America. I mean, we're literally pushing away educated people that could be working in research and doing great innovation. I mean, you look at Silicon Valley and a lot of the CEOs in Silicon Valley, a huge percentage of them are either first or second generation immigrants. So what are we doing, trying to kick them out of America? Frankly, we have a labor shortage in America. We have a labor shortage in a lot of highly specialized fields. These folks would be able to help us, but yet he's driving them away. And never mind the fact that it's a missed educational opportunity to greatly influence future international superstar scientists, superstar business leaders, superstar politicians in foreign nations around the world. It's a missed opportunity to influence them with American values. So none of this makes sense. So why does he do it? Because he's a con man, because he's trying to manipulate the voter base. It's an electoral college strategy to make MAGA happy and to keep the, war on the class war going, particularly from the elite versus the middle class. And trying to keep this thing going because he says it's America first, but it really makes America weaker. And we can see this going on and on and on. So in the end, what's Trump's real goal? In my opinion, is to enrich Trump and Trump's family. And all these things that make no sense are just manipulation tools, like a puppeteer and a marionette. It's nonsense. And the media continues it. I mean, frankly, me as a podcast, I talk about it all the time as well. But the folks in MAGA don't want to hear it. The folks in MAGA, frankly, in political discussion, you can supply a boatload of facts and evidence to back up your side, and it likely is not going to change a whole lot of minds. Because facts and evidence typically don't do that. From a political perspective, we support Republicans or Democrats or other candidates. We support a variety of political issues, not based on facts and evidence, but based on our own internal moral code in terms of our perception of what's right and wrong. So, I guess for me as a podcaster, I can break down the economics. I can show the facts and figures. I can show the evidence that it's foolish for America to deport immigrants, to deport international college students, to create trade wars. It's nuts, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Ultimately, what we need to do is convince people back to moral issues, and in my opinion, we need to the formula of success is built into the preamble of the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, including our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we create a government to secure those rights. If you take that message, which really should be the core values of America, and granted, America has been flawed in its execution of this. I mean, there was slavery, there was women couldn't vote, there's been Jim Crow laws. I mean, there's a whole laundry list of problems that have occurred in American history. But for the most part, a lot of those have been fixed. And there's still more fixing to do. But we all have equal rights. Americans, legal residents with green cards, international students, even illegal immigrants. We all have a right to our own life. And we set up a government to protect that right to our own life. And also, by extension, our own liberty, property, and pursuit of happiness. And I think that's very important to understand. So that really is kind of my moral message that I preach a lot in this podcast. That's why I say this podcast is all about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's why I created happiness76.com, which is your e-commerce store for life, liberty, and happiness merchandise, which you can go there and check it out. And by the way, there's a promo code right there, 20% off with the promo code America20. See, MAGA thinks they've got a claim on American values. I'm telling you, there's big flaws in their strategy and in their philosophy. Okay, let's peel it back. We're going to get to our hometown of Poway and some interesting news with Tony Blain, our local city councilman who's under fire. It was a recall effort on him. I'm going to break down some of the latest news there, but a few other things before we do that. Number one, if you like what we're doing here, okay, if you like what I'm doing with the John Riley Project, you want to encourage me to do more stuff, best thing you can do is like, follow, share, and subscribe. You know, give it a thumbs up if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook or wherever you happen to be watching it. On X, you know, click on that, you know, that like button, that heart button. If you want to follow us, you know, you can subscribe on our YouTube channel. You can follow us and, you know, as a friend on all the social media platforms. If you go to my website, johnrileyproject.com, and go to the connect page, there you'll see all the social media platforms. And in fact, you can even get on our mailing list there. And there's a shortcut way to get to that website, my Connect website. It's just Connect with Johnny. connectwithjohnny.com. That'll take you there. And that's where you can like, you can follow, you can share, you can subscribe. And if you share these podcasts, particularly, you know, granted, these big ass, you know, 1.5 hour long live streams and recorded podcasts are long, but I always break these down into short bite-sized chunks, in some cases 4 to 10 minutes, in other cases 60 seconds or less. You know, those are the ones that are fun to share. And if some of those hit your hot button, you think those are good ideas, you know, push those out and share them. One other thing that you can do is you can rate and review us. The place to do that is on Apple Podcasts. And there you can give us a 5-star rating if you think we deserve it. You can write a little, you know, paragraph, a few sentences, just telling you what you think about this. And if you think we deserve a 5-star rating, boy, we'd love your support. And the other thing you can do, if you really support what we're doing, is you can donate. And, you know, it's voluntary. I'm offering value to you in the content that I produce. If you feel like returning the favor, just go to the johnrileyproject.com, and in the upper menu at the top of the screen, there's a donate page. And then there you can make a contribution, $5, $10, $100, make weekly, monthly, whatever schedule. You can just do a one-timer. If you do that, hey, we really appreciate it. And we would use those dollars to help kind of build the podcast, kind of spend more money on, you know, paid marketing to kind of get the word out. That's what the main objective of those revenue sources would be. So thanks for watching. Thanks. I really appreciate you being a supporter of this. Okay, now let's switch gears, and we're going to talk about Tony Blain. Oh, excuse me, wrong slide. There it is. Tony Blain is a Poway City Council member here, was elected in November of 2024 in District 2, inaugurated into office, you know, took the oath of office in December, 2024, pardon me, took the oath of office in December of 2024. And here we are in May of 2025, and there's an active recall against him. And it's pretty amazing. I mean, a lot of this is based on um, unscrupulous, unethical behavior. Some might say illegal behavior by a public official. In some cases, it's um, making quid pro quo arrangements with other people on, other city council members. Like, hey, if you don't support me on this bill, I'm going to create a recall against you for the next election. In other cases, not using public channels of communication, because all these politicians have a city-owned email address, and all city business should be conducted through that city email address because we want transparency. We want the public record out there. But a lot of Tony Blain's correspondence allegedly have been on personal email, and also in many cases using that Signal chat, which is the one that, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has been using, which is encrypted, but essentially it's used specifically to avoid public record, to avoid public transparency. Now, there's a lot of other things going on here, and there's a whole movement to get them out. And there's some breaking news I want to share with you. Now, first of all, the recall campaign is really being driven by three individuals. At least they're the figureheads. And that's John Couvret, who is the former, or might even be still the existing chairman of the board of the Poway Chamber of Commerce. John is also the president of the Poway Kiwanis Club, very active socially or locally in a lot of things in the business and community organizing efforts. They even created the Poway Foundation, which is to raise money for nonprofits. So he's very well connected. And by the way, his wife, Ginger Couvret, serves on the Poway Unified School Board. So kind of a power couple, and he's one of the main spokesmen. The other two main spokespeople are Anita Edmonston, a former Poway City Council member, and John Mullen, another longtime Poway City Council member. Now, here's some breaking news from John Couvret, and this is very interesting. So last night, apparently, there was video taken near City Hall of Tony Blain being approached by police officers. And you're thinking, oh my God, what's going on? So according to John Couvret, he says there were 3 uniformed police officers from the district attorney's office. They detained Tony Blain and searched his car after the city council meeting. I did not see any arrest. Since the DA started interviewing multiple people regarding Tony's alleged vote trading and extortion several months ago, the DA has declined to comment on the Tony Blain matter. This is the first public action I am aware of regarding the DA's office investigation of Tony Blain. Interesting. So he's already coming under fire here. I mean, he's been under fire locally, but now it's becoming a legit, do we need to get the district attorney for the county of San Diego here? Is this an unscrupulous politician that is violating the law, violating ethics standards? This is serious. It's quite serious. But I want to comment, though, on a number of other things to this, like what's going on with this recall, et cetera. Now, first of all, there have been a lot of recall efforts here in Poway. The most successful one, of course, was the recall of Petty Rexford, which I think happened about 15 years ago. And that's what eventually led to Steve Voss getting on Poway City Council and then eventually mayor, because Steve Voss was the ringleader of the Betty Rexford recall petition. But since then, there have been a number of other recall attempts. There's been multiple recalls efforts on Mayor Voss. I mean, in fact, I know another local community organizer, Chris Olps, was the leader of one of those. And made some headway, got some traction, but never got enough signatures to qualify to get it on the ballot. Now, right now, there is an active recall against sitting council member Peter DeHoff from District 3. Peter DeHoff is my representative on the Poway City Council. But that recall effort seems to be way, way less aggressive than this Tony Blain recall. I mean, if I don't know. I don't think this DeHoff recall is really a serious effort. I think it's being run by a number of people that are kind of the outspoken vocal minority that oppose a lot of what's happening on City Hall, in some cases for rightful reasons. But I don't see this recall effort for DeHoff being serious. But this recall of Tony Blain from a marketing perspective, I'm impressed, because right now they're gathering signatures and they've got to get a certain number of signatures to get on the ballot. So they've got a lot of presence on social media. I've seen YouTube videos. I've seen information on Instagram, on Facebook. So from a social media perspective, they're out there. They've done direct mail to voters. In fact, there's an example there on my screen of some of the recall Tony Blain postcards that have been distributed. I mean, this is a serious effort and it's funded by a lot of people. Now, it's way more professional than what I've seen from other recall efforts. Now, granted, the Betty Rexford recall about 15 years ago, I was not as deeply tuned into Poway politics. But I'm just going to say, from a marketing perspective, I'm impressed with these guys are doing. And the messaging is consistent. It's on target. The evidence is presented clearly. And, from that point of view, I think it's a worthy effort. Now, I'm praising the marketing effort of the campaign. The separate issue is Tony Blain, should he be recalled? I think we can all form our opinions on that. To me, if there's enough evidence, I think so. At very minimum, I think people should sign the ballot to get the recall effort. I like recalls as a general rule. I like recalls because it keeps local politicians on their toes. If they're threatened by a recall, then, they might decide to maybe change their behavior. I think recalls are good. I think recalls are an important part of democracy. Even if I don't necessarily support recalling a person, I'm usually generally supportive of the recall effort. I didn't sign the petition to recall Mayor Voss, mostly because I didn't go out and pursue the opportunity to sign it, but I would have, because I like recalls. But in the end, that I didn't have confidence that the recall of Voss was going to really legitimize itself and become reality. And sure enough, it didn't. So I don't think my one signature was going to make a difference. But speaking of signatures, this is interesting too, is that in the Recall Tony Blain Facebook page, which is run by John Couvrette, one of our good friends of the John Riley Project podcast, our friend Ed Franklin. Ed Franklin's terrific. Go check out his podcast, Ed Franklin, No Limits. He loves talking about, overcoming your struggles in life and being positive and going out there and doing it, getting things done. He also is a great sales leader, a sales professional, a sales trainer. I mean, he's like our local Zig Ziglar, Ed Franklin. So you want to check out Ed Franklin and his work, I encourage you to do it. But Ed Franklin was asking the Recall Tony Blain page, how are we doing on signatures? And John Couvrette responded. And I was honestly surprised he responded. I figured they wouldn't say anything about this, until they got really close, because they want to kind of, keep it under the vest. But it turned out John Couvrette was very open and candid. He says, we need 25% of the 9,700 plus registered voters to sign it. We are halfway through the 90 days and are more than halfway to our required signatures. So that means they're kind of ahead of pace, which is good from their perspective. The momentum is picked up. However, there is still an effort required to get us across the finish line. Interesting. So they're sort of kind of on track. They still need a lot more help. But like I said, I think this recall effort has a better chance of succeeding than a lot of other recall efforts in town. I don't know how Tony Blain's going to survive this. I mean, I know that he's threatened some of his local constituents. I try to have the police go after them. He has said that he, won't talk to people on social media. He'll only talk face to face. And if you attempt to record the conversation, he'll leave. So he's just not a man of the people. It's crazy. But I got to give Tony Blain credit on one thing. And this is crazy. Check this out. Tony Blain for Poway Mayor in 2026. Can you believe this? You got to hand it to Blain. I mean, he's not backing down. He's doubling down. It's very Trumpian in how he's handling this. And he's staying on offense. And I think it's kind of entertaining from my perspective. And what's interesting is that there was some conversation online about whether or not, what Tony Blain's plan was. And I think Tony has said that he's going to run for mayor. He's been saying it for a while. And I think he figures that he can only fully implement his vision, his strategy until he becomes mayor. But then people were saying, oh, no, he's not really running for mayor. And someone said, oh, yeah, I've seen signs. And so I was driving on ESPOLA Road from Poway High School down the hill towards the intersection of Twin Peaks and ESPOLA. And there along the side of the road on the east side of ESPOLA, I saw a few of these Tony Blain for mayor signs. And this is crazy. I mean, so check it out. It says lower water rates, which I think is kind of picking up from some of the Chris Cruz commentary in town. Term limits, which I greatly support term limits, just like I tell you, I support recall as a general strategy. And then protect and improve Poway, which just sounds great. And the sign kind of looks like an American flag. I mean, that takes a lot of balls. I mean, there's a recall effort going after you right now, and you're campaigning for mayor for an election that's not going to happen for almost 2 years. And other people have like studied this sign, like, hey, wait a minute, I don't see any campaign finance, code. Who funded this? They're trying to say if it's illegal, campaigning or not. But I mean, this is just amazing. I mean, it's amazing that he has the cojones that while he's under attack, he's not taking a sitting down and he's still on offense. So I think it's hilarious. But going here, this is a mantra that I've often commented about, particularly when I was a candidate for school board in Poway in 2014. We need to have transparency in politics. In local politics, it should be easy to be transparent, to be real, to be honest. And I think that's, from my point of view, this is the thing that I see from Tony Blain that concerns me, is that he is doing a lot of his communication through covert means and not embracing an open book, by using public communication channels to do his political business. So I've always often said sunshine is the best disinfectant, is be transparent, open it up to the full light of day, and then we can see everything warts and all. Now, in my opinion, what Tony is doing here is, if he wants to be mayor in 2026, well, then you think that he would try to stay out of trouble as a Poway councilman now. And granted, I know he was elected to office to be aggressive and he was going to rattle some cages and he had some things to prove. And he's got some supporters that really want him to go into City Hall and shake things up. But still, if you have a future plan in politics, you can still shake things up, but at least do it legally and stay in your lane and don't commit any unforced errors. And I think that's what's happening here. Now, I appreciate Blain for calling out things that he wants to call out, even if I agree or disagree with him. But just do it the right way. Don't do it in such a way that's going to harm you, where you're getting harassed by the district attorney. Okay, so now here's another angle to this that gets kind of crazy. A Poway witch hunt. Is there a Poway witch hunt going on in Poway? Now, some of the supporters of Tony Blain have, actually, let me reel this back. There is in Poway a dynamic that exists where Mayor Voss, who's been mayor now since 2014, he has a very large block of support in town, whether it's from existing or former council members, or it's really people throughout the city. I've often referred to it as the Poway old guard that kind of wants to continue a lot of the traditions of Poway, or maybe they have the same political philosophy as Voss or some of the other previous Poway politicians, which generally have been Republican. And there is a loyal and vocal opposition to that, which is a minority. And up until very recently, this vocal minority has never, ever been able to win an election, at least not in the last few decades. This is Chris Cruz and Frida Brunzel and, a lot of these folks that are just very vocal. And by the way, I interviewed Frida Brunzel here on my John Riley Project podcast, and she's a very nice lady. I mean, and we had some agreement and some disagreement on issues because, she was running for school board at the time, but I enjoyed hearing her out, so I did enjoy hearing her out. But this is a vocal minority that has generally not been very successful. So now there's that vocal minority is framing this recall effort against Tony Blain as a witch hunt. And I thought, is it a witch hunt? And so I looked up the definition of a witch hunt, and it says, in a political context, a witch hunt refers to an intense and often unfair public campaign or investigation, typically aimed at expose perceived wrongdoings or disloyalty, but often used to harm opponents. It can involve elements of moral panic, mass hysteria, and the scapegoating of individuals or groups. Well, the Tony Blain recall effort fits that definition to a great degree. There are certain elements of that definition that don't fit. But calling it a witch hunt is not that far off base. I mean, it's in the right neighborhood. But it's the funny dynamic is that it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend, is what we're seeing here. You know, the people that are calling this out as a witch hunt, a lot of them rightfully condemn Tony Blain for his ethical violations, but they still oppose the recall election because they hate Mayor Voss so much and hate Mayor Voss's block of support on city council and throughout the community, that when they see an opponent to Voss, in this case, Tony Blain, who's on city council, who's rattling cages, who's challenging Mayor Voss, and who has already announced his candidacy for mayor in 2026, you know, in some cases, we see the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And I think that adds more. It's like a soap opera here in Poway. What's going on? It's nuts. It really is crazy. Now, and by the way, to kind of go back to this witch hunt thing, apparently, and again, you guys can fact check me on this. I believe this to be true, that there was a proposal that was being considered on the Poway City Council that would give city council members, or perhaps the city council total in a vote, the ability to fine other city council individuals, city council member individuals, you know, essentially to start this sort of a fine war across the die. Or is it the dais? I always kind of get those confused, but at any rate, the pronunciation. But thankfully that was shot down, because in my opinion, that's a step too far. We can't have politicians fining other politicians, especially when you have deep partisanship. I mean, if there is a legal case against Tony Blain, then it needs to be pursued legally by the district attorney, which seems like the wheels are in motion. And at the same time, if there's a problem with Tony Blain that needs to be kicked out of office, then recall him. And there is a recall effort. But the fining just seems like that would just be petty and silly and finger pointing. So it's something. It's something. Remember when Poway was just kind of a mellow place, you know, with city politics were usually pretty quiet. It makes you think of the Poway, the good old days of Poway. And, you know, we hear a lot of this sort of commentary, especially in the context of our housing discussion, you know, with all the apartment buildings and condos that go up on Poway Road, how the farm has taken over the Stone Ridge Country Club, how they're building out on Twin Peaks and was that Holly Court, or is it, you know, right there on Twin Peaks and Midland? They're putting in a housing development. There's housing developments all over Poway. There's in South Poway, North Poway, Central Poway. Yeah, granted, they're mostly in the South. But a lot of times people say, oh man, I remember Poway when I grew up here. I went to school here and my parents grew up here. And you get these, oh, it's the city and the country. You know, we long for those good old days. And I found this photo here on the screen from former city council member Bob Emery. You know, rest in peace. He still has a website with a lot of old Poway photographs, which is kind of neat. And this was from 1973. And you look at that and you see an old Poway Road with a lot of a scatter, you know, sort of haphazard businesses set up along the road, 2 lanes in each direction. And it doesn't look a whole lot different than Poway Road looked probably, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. You know, the first big transition of Poway Road, I think, is when they built the Walmart, and then eventually the Lowe's that went into Poway, and that reconfigured, you know, a lot of the auto dealers. But then, of course, in the last, you know, 8 years or so, we're seeing all the development on Poway Road, the Poway Commons project. We are now have the Fairfield project, where the bowling alley and the thrift stores used to be, which is freaking people out. And then, of course, you know, there's a lot of people like to call it the hole in the ground, or the pit, which is really the, what was it? The outpost. And that's the one that created a two-level underground parking. They hit water because the water table is there because there's a creek there. And then the company eventually went bankrupt, but apparently it's another company's taken over, and I've seen some movement there in terms of construction. So hopefully that'll get fixed. But prior to all that, this picture of Poway Road in 1973 didn't look a whole lot different than Poway Road, let's say in 2005 or in 1995 or in 1985. It's interesting. So people always long for the good old days, but I sort of long for the political good old days of Poway, because it used to always be that Poway was, generally speaking, a very well-run city, and it still is to a great degree. And if you don't believe that, compare the road surfaces in Poway Road, and the minute you cross over into Rancho Bernardo, it's like you're going off-road with potholes and gravel and rocks everywhere. I mean, Poway does a good job of taking care of the meat and potatoes, fire, police, public safety, roads. They're working on the water system. Now, granted, they had that big water fiasco a few years ago with the rope and everything else, but they're fixing it. You want the city to be focused on public safety, on roads, and maybe parks and that sort of thing. But everything has changed. Now we've got recalls of Blain, recalls of Voss, recalls of DeHoff. And it makes you think, what's happening in Poway? What's causing all of this disruption? And the short answer is it's housing. Housing is what's freaking everybody out. And so now the latest controversy is this. The Big O tire store on Poway Road. And you know where that is? I mean, we got a bunch of tire stores on Poway Road. There's Discount Tire, which I usually go to, and those folks are great. And then I know there's Evans Tire, which is, further east on Poway Road. It's sort of kind of near the outpost where that's being built, kind of across the street from the car wash that is now shuttered and closed up shop. But then there's also the Big O tire store, which is right next to Hertz Rental Car, or is it Enterprise Rental Car there? And it was right next to where the Poway Bowling Alley used to be. And what was interesting is when they built the Fairfield project, which is that gigantic 4-story luxury apartments, and some of that retail that's going to be on the sidewalk there, which I don't know if they've really filled any of that. There is they kept the Big O tire store there, which shocked me. So apparently that is a separate parcel of land that was owned by that individual landowner. I don't know if it was Big O Tires, the corporation, or some independent person who built the company or built the building, and then Big O leased it. But they didn't sell when that whole Fairfield project went up. The bowling alley sold, thrift stores sold, but these guys held out. And I always thought it was kind of weird that there was going to be a tire shop next to all these brand new apartment buildings. But eventually they finally have decided that they're going to flip this thing. And so there was a proposal that went to the city hall about putting in a 16-unit apartment building there to replace the Big O tires. And this apartment building was going to be in the same architecture and style as the rest of the Fairfield project. So it would look kind of the same. It would sort of be just another building in that overall campus. And what happened? People complaining, the usual complaints. Oh my God, there's going to be more traffic. Oh my God, there's going to be stress on infrastructure. Oh my God, there's not enough parking. We can't have this. No more housing. And it was interesting having some of these conversations online, because speaking for myself as a guy that I go to Discount Tire, which I like those guys. But when I go to Discount Tire, man, that place is cooking. There are customers going in and out. They have employees going in and out of that parking lot. They got cars moving around because, after they're done on the, getting their tires replaced, they have to move them out into the back parking lot until the people come and pick them up. And then you got vendors delivering tires, big trucks with tires being delivered. And I'm thinking to myself, there is no way that a 16-unit apartment building could generate more traffic than a shop that sells tires. And look at that. It was a Big O tire with 3 bays, 3 individual bays to take tires off and put tires on. And I was thinking, that just is crazy. I mean, because I remember one time, a long time ago, someone was challenging me on this sort of an idea of how much traffic is generated from construction projects, particularly from a residential perspective. And they said, go to a street corner in town that maybe one of the outlets might have, let's just say, a dozen homes, like in a cul-de-sac or something. Maybe, to keep the math equal, 16 homes in a cul-de-sac, and park your car out there at the street corner, and then just measure the traffic that goes in and out of that cul-de-sac. It's not a lot. Now, granted, there's a little bit more these days with Amazon making deliveries, but it's not a lot. Not a lot of people are going in and out. I mean, there's some, but it's not a lot. And compare that to the amount of people that are going in and out of almost any commercial property. And a tire store usually has a lot of traffic. So I just found that to be amazing. But even if you were to take the worst case scenario of a 16-unit building and said, oh my God, these places are too expensive, we're going to have 3 or 4 high-income adults in each of these places. So it might be 16 units, but it's really going to be 48 or 64 cars. And it's a lot worse than you think it is, Riley. Even if you took it at that extreme, it can't be that much of a difference than the in and out traffic of a tire shop. So it makes, again, this is more, it's like Trump, it's like economically, what they're saying, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't match reality. It's irrational. And here we go again with this. So it's just more NIMBYism. Not in my backyard. I don't want more housing in Poway. We're going to shut these people down. And that ultimately is control over other people and their lives and what they do on their own property. And we have inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We have property rights. But other folks in town want to clamp down on your property rights, want to clamp down on your individual rights and tell you what you can and cannot do, even if what you're doing is peaceful, even if what you're doing is productive. They don't want it. And so we're seeing more of this meddling. Now, I know this went to the city council. I don't know if it's been approved or not. It might have been. I need to double check on this. But I hope it is approved. Because, by the way, why in the hell is there a tire shop next to a bunch of luxury apartments? Those guys have those pneumatic drills or, to take off the lug nuts of these cars where it goes rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat. Those tire shops are loud. And housing, generally speaking, is way quieter. So I think this would be overall a net improvement to put in 16 units of housing over a tire shop. So let's see what happens on this particular issue. Now, there was one other interesting comment that came out of that when, I enjoy being on Poway social media, by the way. There's a lot of, I have friends and I'll call them frenemies on some of the Poway social media groups, mostly on Facebook. And I enjoy the chatter. I enjoy the conversation. That's why I have a podcast. I enjoy the discussion. I like learning about what people think. And I like having my ideas challenged. I like challenging other folks professionally and properly, and not name calling and being an idiot about it. But at any rate, from this, one of my frenemies online said, well, John, you think you know what you're doing? Maybe you should run for mayor. And the response to this was funny. It was, the comments were all over the place. And, in some cases, some people identified me pretty accurately, not exactly perfect, but pretty accurately. Other people had completely wrong opinions of me. They think, I stand for A, they think I stand for Z. They have no rational thought being given to this, but it's funny. I just thought it was funny. So let me just say this. I'll make it clear. I am not running for mayor. I have no interest in being a Poway mayor. I look at what Voss is going through and I'm thinking, do I really want to do that? No. Now, obviously I have some ideas on what I think Poway should do and what we should be and how we should evolve. And if you watch my podcast or listen, you know a lot of those thoughts and comments. But it's so much more fun and from my opinion, so much more productive to do it this way, through my podcast, through being an influencer, because I can tell you what I think. I don't have to be careful and say, oh, I really mean this. I don't have to couch my words knowing that I might be running in a future election. I can just tell you what I think. And everything I say on this podcast, unless I'm making a joke or something, is what I think. And you may disagree with me, you may agree with me, but I'm just putting it right out there. That's why my face and my name is right there in front and center. And so for me, it's way more fun to do this. Now, I will say that there may have been a time in my life where I would have considered that because, I ran for public office in 2014. I wasn't successful. So, yeah, sure, there might have been a time I would have considered running for Poway City Council or Poway Mayor, but a long time ago. That was well over 10 years ago. And, I'm not interested in that. So if you see anybody talking about that, just have a good laugh because that ain't real. So at any rate, okay, there we go. An hour and 15 minutes of stuff from the John Riley Project. Happy to be back. Going to be doing more of these recorded podcasts to try to sort of get them out when I can. And then I'm going to eventually get into a rhythm here where we'll have a regularly scheduled live stream that we will be consistent on. Until I get to that point, I'm going to be doing some of these recorded versions. Of course, I'll be putting out clips and 60-second shorts and other things related to this that you can check out. So if you have more information, you want to learn more, go to johnrileyproject.com. Follow me on social media, sign up for my mailing list. If you are so inclined, give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Consider, if you are so inclined, if you feel I'm providing value to you, you can make a donation back to this project, which I will use every dollar and cent to reinvest into growing the audience and making the podcast better. Thank you very much for joining me. And for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, this is John Riley. Thank you very much.